Hello, this is your host, Akhil Navluri, and welcome to the brand new episode of the TechnoSpace podcast series. In this podcast episode, I'm super thrilled and honored to welcome one of the most eminent and prominent industry leaders pertaining to the IT space. And this time, we're connecting with him from the East Coast, and he's none other than Mr. Brian Beach, who happens to be the principal tech lead developer experience for the AWS company, the Amazon Web Services, and he's based out of Raleigh, North Carolina, the United States of America. So, Brian, it gives me an absolute honor and pleasure to welcome you to this podcast initiative of mine. So, Brian, how are you doing, and how is the weather in Raleigh right now?
Great, thank you. It's an honor to be here. I'm doing really well. It's early on Friday morning here in the U.S., and it's looking like it's going to be a really nice weekend. We just sent my daughter off to college last week.
Okay.
And so this is her first week at school, and we'll be spending the weekend at North Carolina State University for what they call Packapalooza, which is like the welcome party for all the new people returning to school. So we'll be heading over there to spend some time, and it's looking like it's going to be a beautiful weekend.
Absolutely, absolutely. Even likewise, even I think I'm also predicting for having a great weekend in Melbourne. So at the stroke of this time, which is 9:04 p.m. AEST, which is Melbourne time, let's kick off with the podcast episode. All right. So Brian, the first and foremost thing, since I'm pretty much inquisitive to ask you this. So Brian, let's talk about your 20 years of journey in the IT industry.
Sure. Yeah. So my background is first and foremost as a computer engineer. That's what I went to school for. That's what my degree is in. I went to Polytechnic University many, many years ago, back in the late 1990s. But I spent most of my career as a developer. So despite having an engineering degree, I haven't really touched hardware much in my career. I've spent almost all of that doing software development. And I started my career at a small company called Direct Insight. And they're a small billing company. They really, my job there focused on prototyping. I would work with customers as we brought on a new customer and help prototype the application, tailor it a little bit to their needs, and got out and did a lot of travel at that point in my career. Really got to see the world a bit. Spent almost a year in Leeds, England with a customer, and I love that part of it. I'll come back to that because I drifted away from that over time. And so I did that for a little while. And then this is kind of coming into, again, very late 1990s, heading right into 2000. And I moved to Priceline, to a new startup coming out of Priceline called Retail DNA. So I spent about a year in Connecticut working there. And this is going right into the first tech bust. So the beginning of my career was kind of a rocket ship. Things were crazy at that point.
All right.
And then the bubble burst right around late 90s going into 2000, 2001. And I was at Priceline at the time. So I left there and then went to KPMG, to the accounting firm KPMG, and spent about 13 years in back office work at various roles at KPMG. Most of my time there was spent originally as a developer, then a dev manager. And in the later half of that time, I really started to focus in on some of the internal platforms that we developed and managed, kind of the beginnings of platform as a service. So rather than focusing on the applications themselves that I had been doing for the first half, I began to really focus my efforts on the tools that the internal developers were using. And so my team that I was managing ran things like our data integration platform. We ran our identity management system. We had a workflow platform. And all of these were used by applications throughout the organization. And so, these words didn't really exist at this point, but I would say I was kind of running the platform as a service team for KPMG, and really had a lot of success there. We grew some of these tools from early. Some of them existed, some of them we launched, but overall we had really strong adoption. Things were going really well there. And there was a parallel team. This was kind of before DevOps, so Dev and Ops were separate. The Ops team was simultaneously running an infrastructure as a service solution, trying to build a private cloud based on VMware. This is kind of a point in time where everybody was trying to do that, right? Everyone was running VMware, but trying to automate it, looking at what was happening in the public clouds, trying to mimic that. And I was doing exactly that. So or they were and struggling. And so I ended up shifting over and taking over that project and left the platform side and moved over into the infrastructure side, which was most of this was new for me. I had never, touched a Cisco Nexus switch in my life. And suddenly I was writing a bunch of code to automate it. So our infrastructure was mostly VMware, Cisco UCS, and then a lot of Cisco switching and fiber gear with EMC backend. And so we were automating that entire
All right.
stack using some tools from Cisco. And throughout that time, also the whole time I was looking at AWS as the model, saying this is what we're trying to recreate locally. And after doing that for about 2 years, we had some success, but we were never. It was clear that we were never going to be able to do what these, now what we call hyperscalers can do. And so the entire time I was just becoming more and more enamored with AWS. I ended up writing a book on PowerShell for AWS. A lot of the automation we were doing was in .NET back then. I'm predominantly a .NET developer by career. I do pretty much everything now. I don't really actively write code anymore. But my background was a .NET developer, and the whole time we were looking to AWS and automating with .NET and PowerShell. And so toward the end of my journey at KPMG, I wrote a book on automating AWS with PowerShell with A-Press. And as a result of that, very quickly got recruited into AWS.
All
Which,
right.
it didn't take much to convince me to make that move at that point, because I had really fallen in love with what Amazon was doing.
Yep. That's pretty good, Brian. I mean, that's a very interesting journey. I mean, 20 years, it's like, a beautiful timeline, I would say. Now, Brian, you just were giving me, and you just were mentioning about that you were part of the platform side, and then you moved to the infrastructure side. So I wanted to understand from your personal point of view, how was that leap for you, jumping all the way from platform to infrastructure?
Sure. Yeah. So it was definitely an area of discomfort. I still have a whole pile of old Cisco equipment in my basement that, I
Oh,
would
really?
be crashing on the weekends trying to learn. And, you feel like an imposter when you move over, when you jump over the fence, and things that seem very normal to the infrastructure crew that we had never really touched. I'm inherently curious, so I have a pretty good idea of how the infrastructure works, but I've never actually sat at the console in a Catalyst switch trying to configure it. So it was a bit of imposter syndrome jumping over there and learning it.
Yeah.
And there was also, not surprisingly, things have, I think, improved a little bit, but not really much. There was a lot of hesitation about doing this, about that this could be automated, that we could allow software to go in and touch and configure switches, and that this wasn't terrifying. And so we had to really slowly convince them over time that this was okay. And the way I approach that myself is,
Right.
we started with a validation to say, hey, you're going to go do X. Your team is going to manually configure this new VLAN that's going to be, we used a lot of like microsegmentation methodology, where we would cordon things off in a network using VLANs. And each app lived in its own. And we say, hey, this is what it's supposed to look like. Your team's going to go build it. And I know you don't trust me yet to automate it, but I'm going to validate it when you're done and point out all the issues that all the mistakes that the manual team made. And so we started with just a validation workflow. The ticket would go out, the engineer would go and implement it, it would come back, and then our script would run over it and say, oh, well, there's like 3 things in there that are misconfigured, and we caught them. And we did that
Right.
for a couple of months until they really started to earn trust and say, yeah, you're right, we can actually do this a lot better through automation and software. And slowly we started winning these battles. It took a really long time to convince the storage team. We got networking convinced in the first 6 months of this project. I did this for about 2 years. And by the end of the 2 years, we were still fighting a little bit with the storage team, rightly so, right? I mean, storage is a different world. If you break the network, all right, you might be down for a couple hours. If you break the storage system, you could really lose you could lose some persistent data and cause some serious problems.
Absolutely.
So it took a little while to convince people that this was possible, but
Yeah.
we were able to do that over a while and really kind of show the value of automation and consistency that we could deliver through an automation platform.
All right. I mean, that path was not very easy for you, but you got yourself up and, just made the best out of it. So, which is really
Yeah.
inspiring, Brian. So now, Brian, heading on for that, we were just talking about your journey. Now, Brian, I just wanted to understand this. Like, would you like to, give a walkthrough of your tenure, being in the Amazon Web Services, that is
Sure.
AWS, pertaining mainly to the development side?
Yeah. Yeah. So I've been at AWS now for about 11 years. So I joined back in 2014, came, from KPMG at the time, got recruited into AWS and joined here. I was living in New York at the time. I'm now in North Carolina. I was originally recruited to the enterprise support organization and ran and built out the support team in New York. So back in 2014, AWS is really in kind of hyper growth mode. Everything, the cloud was growing really quickly at the time. And enterprise support is often one of the later steps that you would get to, right? You don't start there as a small customer. So we
Yep.
were growing really fast, but we also had a lot of customers that were maturing to the level where they were joining enterprise support and wanted things like so the enterprise support team really is a series of technical account managers, TAMs, that get embedded with your team, a dedicated support person to support your company. Um, at this point, we're growing really fast, but all the customers are just graduating to this level. So enterprise support is growing much faster than even AWS was, and it was this really crazy period where we couldn't hire fast enough. I was spending almost all of my time interviewing and recruiting to keep up with the growth in New York. And over time, started to look for other avenues. And so we started to augment the team. We didn't have an office here in Raleigh yet. And so I started to augment the team with people from Raleigh. And if you don't know Raleigh, right, Raleigh's a relatively small city, but there's a lot of tech here. So Red Hat is based here, NetApp is based here,
Okay.
Cisco, IBM have a big presence. So there's a lot of tech talent here, and it was we hadn't started recruiting in this area yet. And by the end of the first year in New York, about a third of my team was remote, based out of North Carolina, and I was starting to spend some time down here. My wife and I fell in love with it, ended up relocating. And I took over at that point, the Southeast, and started managing all of the Southeast of the US. We kind of split the Northeast and Southeast. So I had Washington, DC, the Atlanta office, and the new North Carolina office that we were just starting to spin up based on all the people that we were hiring here. So I
Right.
spent a bunch. So about 2 years, the first year growing out in New York, then growing out the team down here. And we really leaned into that remote model and started supporting the rest of the country out of the North Carolina area. We had people flying all over supporting customers from right here. So this plan was working really well. This idea of kind of hitting the markets that were untapped at the time to hire.
Right.
I did that for a little while, and we got to the point where we were starting to talk about promotion. It's coming up on 2 years. And I remember this really well. I sat with my wife at dinner one night and started talking. I was like, "Oh, yeah, I was really excited. Hey, we're starting to work on my promotion document." And she sort of looked across the table at me and said, you really hate your job, right?" Um, she was. I think maybe I was just too busy to notice it, but she was absolutely right. Right? She knew me better than I did at the time, and I had come here really excited about AWS and the tech, and was running a recruiting organization at the time, and we were super successful. But I very suddenly, within 2 weeks of that conversation, had left that role and moved into an IC and into an individual contributor role as a solutions architect. The other thing Raleigh has a lot of is universities. So we have Duke University, we have UNC Chapel Hill, which is where Michael Jordan played for the Tar Heels. Two
Oh,
big universities, and then the third big one here is North Carolina State, which is a big engineering school, the one I said my daughter just went to. So I joined the higher ed team, selling to universities at the time. And I think mine and probably most people that hear this story think of higher ed as maybe kind of a bit of a government bureaucracy, right? Not the cutting edge of tech users, and that's true, right? In all honesty, that's pretty true.
yep.
But these universities have this other side where they do this research, and they have these huge research grants to do a lot of work in machine learning and analytics and computer science. And so I got to see some really, really varied workloads in this role that you wouldn't normally get to see. It was really awesome. So I was working with researchers that were trying to listen to speech patterns and predict early onset Alzheimer's. There was researchers who were looking at imaging and
Oh,
X-rays and MRIs and trying to predict precancerous cells and, really interesting work like that. Maybe the most interesting of those was Clemson University. It's actually South Carolina, but pretty close to me. Clemson University ran, at the time, this was the largest HPC cluster in the cloud, and the first to break 1 million CPU. So we
oh,
worked on this massive scale HPC cluster, ran it up to about 1.1 million CPUs, 5560, I forget the exact number, 1,000 EC2 instances driving this monster cluster that we built, and spent
okay.
months fighting the technical issues to make that possible, right? We were pushing the boundaries of what AWS could do. There were plenty of customers that were at the million CPU scale at that time, but no one had ever tried to launch that in, to make this economical, you couldn't spend all the time in launch. You had to launch really quickly and then run for
Exactly.
a few hours and then shut it back down. It's a very hyper transient workload. So we were trying to get to
It is.
a launch in under an hour, try to get a million CPUs up and in a cluster all communicating with in under an hour, run it for a couple of hours and then try to shut it down again. And we were really pushing the boundaries of what was possible at the time, both for AWS and also pushing the boundaries of what the tooling could do. Slurm is the schedule orchestrator for this. So we made a bunch of patches in Slurm and submitted a bunch of stuff back into the community to drive this and make it possible. It was super cool. So I know I'm kind of chatting. Feel free if you want to jump in with questions, you're welcome to. I know I
I
get
mean,
on a roll. I'm only about 2017, into my career at AWS at this point. There are very few places that you can work where you get to see the varied large scale stuff that you get to do here. It's really this is a unicorn place to work. So I did that for a bunch of years, higher ed, working with tons of different customers all around the US. And then kind of going into the pandemic, so 2020 timeframe, not that I knew there was going to be a pandemic, but I kind of went back to my roots as a .NET developer. I was missing that a little bit. And
okay.
the EC2 team was spinning up a new group called the App Modernization Lab. And what we would do is go and help customers who were running .NET framework applications and stuck on Windows EC2 instances and help them modernize, move to .NET Core, what's just .NET now, help them go through that modernization journey, and then not just update the code, but also look at, the easiest would be, let's get you into container running in Linux, maybe with an ARM backend. We can dramatically reduce the cost to make it much easier to run that workload, but also trying to get them into serverless and really embrace some more modern compute patterns. And I did that for a year or two. And as a result, got much more deeply embedded in the developer community across AWS, right? As a generalist SA, you sort of see everything. But I got much more engaged with the developer community throughout AWS and ended up moving into a tech lead role
All
that
right.
I've had now for the last 3 years. And essentially, I now run that community of all of the SAs, technical account managers, professional services that consider themselves to be developers. Right, we have a mix of infrastructure people, storage experts, developers in those roles, and I lead the community now that would identify as a developer.
That's pretty interesting, Brian. Brian, the major thing which I am, very curious to ask you this, like you had a collaboration with different universities, like in Raleigh. So, and they came up with cutting edge kind of ideas, whether it was, detecting the Alzheimer's and, the clusters and everything. So, Brian, did that ever occur to you that, whatever, let's say these projects the kids are creating, or let's say the students are creating, did you think that, you wanted to use this as a POC for the AWS and, use it as a main time project? Did you come up with
Yeah,
that initiative?
a little bit, yeah. So, often, well, first of all, most of the researchers that you're working with are not, kids and students. These are usually postdoctorate
Oh, okay.
PhDs that are
My bad.
really pushing the boundaries. And I will pause here and say, by no means am I a data scientist. So a lot of the science that they were working on was way out of my realm of understanding. But I could, of course, still help them with the cloud infrastructure necessary to run this. And as a side effect, really learned a lot about what they do. So often what we're encouraged to do, both as SAs and really what I encourage within this community, is to identify those patterns and put together solutions for it, right? We have something called the solutions library that's full of these patterns and practices. And then there's a bunch of other similar things. And when we identify something like this, we would help then to codify that knowledge and make it available to the rest of the less, kind of pioneering, cutting edge researchers out in the world. And so things like, say, how to run a Slurm cluster on AWS, we put together a lot of that guidance and documentation. There's
Right.
actually there's a solution that was called Parallel Cluster. It's been renamed now, and I can't think of the name of it. I didn't directly work on that. It was somebody else within the organization, but
Right.
really took that and codified it into an application that's pretty heavily used. Say, I want to be able to quickly spin up an HPC cluster running in AWS. I spent a lot of time. NC State, the one that my daughter's at, is a heavy user of Moodle, and Moodle's an
Okay.
open source kind of coursework application. So if you've used things like Blackboard or Canvas when you're in school, it's usually where your work assignments will be and where you submit your homework. And so I spent a lot of time building those things out for NC State and others. And so there's also a pattern on how to do that I originally authored that's still out there and pretty heavily used. There's a few others too. There's a lot of weird bespoke things that happen in higher ed that don't happen elsewhere. So in the US, all of the universities are connected with something called Internet 2. So you can think of this like essentially a private, it's a private internetwork, sort of what the internet was originally intended to be, right? The internet started as connecting universities and government entities for research purposes.
Yeah,
And then it kind of
exactly.
morphed into just a public thing. So Internet 2 came back in and said, all right, we're going to recreate the original intent of that and have a very high speed, hundreds of gigabyte interconnects between all the universities in the US. And so I spent a lot of time working with them and put together a lot of the patterns and practices for how to interconnect with AWS. And then that team at Internet 2 also runs a lot of interesting software packages in the identity management space. I spent a lot of time in my prior career in identity management. So they built something called Shibboleth, which is a very common SAML-based single sign-on solution that's used across the university systems globally. And so I put together the patterns and practices for that are published. There was a lot of those opportunities to say, I want to look at what the researchers, what the universities are doing, and package that, codify it, make it available to the rest of the world.
That's an amazing initiative, Brian. Now, Brian, heading on to this, I'm pretty interested to understand this. So, in depth, Brian, would you like to tell me about your expertise, let's say on the lines of business intelligence, then the software
Sure.
developer tools, and the
Yeah.
CI/CD, the CDK, which is the cloud development kit, the cloud formation, then the Gen AI developer tools, and along with that, to conclude it with Q.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So my role now, again, I'm the tech lead driving this community of developers, people who would identify as a developer. And really a big portion of that role, I split this into three roles, right? I run that community, I keep them vibrant. The community itself does a few things. One of the most important things they do is they act as the specialists that go out and support all of our developer tools, DevOps and developer tools. So if you've had a conversation with AWS, say about CDK or about code pipeline or code build, it was likely that you talked to somebody within my community, somebody that I'm doing the
Oh,
enablement for.
all right.
We have a team of specialists, right? But they're not huge. So we've got a small team of tens of specialists in that area who are really, really deep experts in these tools. And they don't have enough time to talk to every customer. We have literally millions of customers. So I maintain this community that is the long tail of all the other conversations that are happening.
Right.
And do my best to keep them as close to parity with that core team that specialize this all day. Um, And so we're covering a bunch of things. So code pipeline, code build, et cetera. That's all CI/CD. And we're talking to customers about how to optimize for AWS, how to do a blue-green or canary deployment into a multi-count environment in AWS and do that safely so that we've got clean rollback in CloudFormation is kind of the original infrastructure as code solution. We still manage that. And then CDK, if you're not familiar with the Cloud Development Kit, is sort of an abstraction layer on top of CloudFormation. And it allows you to write infrastructure as code in a programming language of your choice. So I can write that in Java or Python or C#, and describe my infrastructure. Essentially describing my infrastructure as a series of classes that I'm creating. Say I'm going to instantiate a class that is EC2. And as I do this, what it's doing is rendering behind the scenes CloudFormation. But this abstraction layer makes it much more familiar to a developer. I'm not trying to learn something new. The patterns are easier. It gives me full context with things like looping constructs and decisions that are really hard to implement in some of these declarative languages. And as an abstraction layer, really allows me to build higher level constructs. So if you've ever written CloudFormation or even Terraform, creating EC2 instances is super easy. But then you've got a security group and an IAM role that's attached to it, and like all of these other low-level pieces that you need to go and think through. With these higher level constructs, we can derive all of that and build it for you. So hey, I want to have an EC2 instance, and it's going to talk to this S3 bucket to keep that example really simple. The framework, CDK, is smart enough to understand that I need permissions to do that. And so I need to create an IAM role. I need to attach it to the EC2 instance. It needs permission to do this so that it can talk to it. And it handles all of that for you sort of implicitly, and it does it in a least privileged way. So it's, it really simplifies a lot of that and codifies best practices so that it makes it much easier for you to build. So I spent, a lot of time on all of these technologies for the first year that I was doing this. Started this role at the very beginning of 2022. And then mid-2022, sometime in the late spring, we launched CodeWhisperer, which was our first generative AI solution. To be honest, it was kind of quiet. We didn't have a lot of, we'd show it to customers and like, oh, that's pretty cool. It generates code. It does, and CodeWhisperer did early automatic code generation using generative AI, would essentially complete the command you were working on, or if you gave it a comment, would write a function for you. But there wasn't no one was really paying attention to this. It was kind of something that customers say, oh, that's cool, I like it. Not really interested right now. And then ChatGPT happened at the end of 2020, the end of 2022, right? November of 22, if I'm right. It's been a while now. ChatGPT launches, and suddenly everyone's talking about generative AI, and we're like, hey, we've actually been telling you about this for 6 months. You just, didn't seem to care until the media was talking about it. And by the beginning of 2023, all we talked about was generative AI and CodeWhisperer, and I was spending 95% of my time talking about generative AI. Fast forward a few months, and we renamed this to QDeveloper, and then QDeveloper added in things like the ability to generate code in chat. So I wasn't just predicting the next, dozen lines of code. We could actually write a full class implementation, write an entire file, or even by the end of 23, multiple files. Say, hey, I need this implementation. I need you to write this web app for me. I want the SQL layer, the logic, the HTML, the CSS, and it would generate all of that. We made huge leaps in that first year. This is still, late 2023. Then shifting into 2024, we started to see the beginnings of those agentic workflows that everyone's really excited about now, right? Agentic didn't really get popular until kind of the beginning of this year, very end of last year. We were doing this in mid to early 2023, and we're doing things like automating code transformations. Hey, you've got this old Java application that you've been accumulating technical debt for 10 years. It's still stuck in Java 8. We can help you get it into 21. And we've got all the tools to automate that entire process. You can let Q do all of that work for you. Or we started to give it access to tools and say, great, you went and wrote this web application, but it doesn't work when you give it back to me. It would be really nice if you compiled it first and ran the linters and executed the unit tests and don't give it back to me until you're passing them all. And it got to the point where it could iterate on that behind the scenes before it even showed the results to you. And all of that has progressed through this year. The gains we've seen in the last year are tremendous. We've gone from, hey, generate some code and I'll fix it for you, to I generated code and I worked through all the issues and cleaned it up, ran security linters on it, fixed all the issues. Here it is. It's near ready for production. You just need to review it. And then finally, so that's Q. I've been working on that now for quite a while. And then just a couple of weeks ago, we launched Kiro. So Kiro is very similar, but Kiro is its own IDE. So Q has mostly been delivered as plugins to existing IDEs. We also have a CLI and plugins to GitLab and GitHub, but it's mostly an experience that works through plugins. And so we're always a little constrained by what we can do in a plugin. We don't have full control to just change everything. Kiro changes that, right? Kiro gives us the ability to take full control of the user experience. And it's, it does all the things Q does. It just does it in a much nicer, cleaner way. It really looks great. And at the same time, while we've been working on these tools, we've also been thinking a lot about the methodology and what's the right way to use generative AI. So the other thing that I've been working on is this concept called what we call the AI DLC. Essentially, how does AI affect the software development lifecycle? And we've watched for a while as people are adopting these tools and really struggling to get the value that they expect from generative AI. And when we look at it, what we see is this vibe coding world. Right? It's changed, it's evolved over time, but mostly people are vibe coding, which is, I give you a 2-sentence description. You write some code for me. I realize I didn't tell you a lot of things that I should have, so I ask you to make some changes. And we do this iteratively 24 times until we kind of get to where I want to go. But we meandered there, and we left all this technical debt in the way as we went, right? And all of this would be much better architected had we got it right the first time. So AI DLC that we've sort of landed on thinks about, how do we pull all of that forward? We would never work that way as humans. We would think and design it first. And so what we're really promoting these days is bringing AI into the early phases. Bring the agent in during the design phase before you write user stories. Have the discussions, work out the uncertainty and the unknowns there, so you're not making all these corrective actions to code later. And we've been doing this now for 6 months or so, that we've been running these AI DLC engagements with customers and really refining this. And to come back into Kiro, right? Kiro embodies this and has this idea of spec-driven development. And in this, it will do exactly what I described. If you move it from, you can pick vibe mode or spec mode. If you pick spec mode, it says you give it your prompt, and rather than writing code, it starts to iterate on user stories and say, here's what I think you meant. Let's change the user stories before we move forward. Make sure that I understand your intent. And then from that, it will take that and generate a technical design and say, is this actually what you meant? And I can say, well, actually, we use this library, right? This is cool, but we use SQL Alchemy. I don't want you to go directly to MySQL. That's kind of our standard. Let's change some of these technical assumptions. And then we get that right. And then we say, okay, now it's looking pretty good. Why don't you generate the backlog for me? Generate the implementation plan. And it'll put together what it calls the task list and build that out. And now finally we say, okay, this looks good. I like everything you're doing. I like the user stories. I like the design. I like the implementation plan. Now you can write some code. Go ahead. And we're seeing dramatically better outcomes as a result of doing that. So that's kind of the short version of the last couple of years of this evolution that we've watched. Everything from predictive, let me write the next couple lines of code for you, all the way through to let me pull you all the way back into the very early cycles of the software dev life cycle, make you part of the team, iterated on it together, and then have much better outcomes.
That's amazing, Brian. Now, Brian, you just were giving me the example of Code Whisper, aka now Q, and then Kiro. Now, for both of them to give a proper result, or let's say a good output, is it all on the prompt that has to be crystal clear that it has to give a good output there?
There is no substitute for properly describing what you want to do. Take that example, right? When we talk about vibe coding, imagine you're a new developer. You start a job at a company. Your manager is super busy. You never get to talk to him. You're not involved in the design of things. And every day he just sticks a little Post-it note on your monitor and says, go do this. And it's like a 2-sentence description. Right? I think any human that did that for a couple of days would probably quit and be looking for a new job at the end of the first week, right? That would be such a frustrating experience.
Absolutely. That is true.
But we do exactly that, right? That's how we vibe code today. No matter what tool you're using, that's the prevailing pattern, and it's crazy. So really refining that prompt, thinking a lot about exactly what you want to do, predicting the assumptions is great. But what we're seeing is we're terrible at that. No matter how hard we try to predict all of the assumptions, we miss a lot. I just went through this exercise. One of the other things that I do is I do a lot of the kind of advocacy and run our blog channels and big events. So we're planning for reInvent, which is our upcoming conference. And I was just building out an application that will be kind of the Kiro challenge. And so I wrote up all my kind of high level requirements for this application and was building it with Kiro and said, we're going to have this challenge and developers are going to compete to complete this challenge. Here's what it looks like and all of this. And then I said, okay, now let's start building the design. And it comes back and it asks you some questions. And the first thing it says is, hey, are there any other roles, any other personas that we need to think about in this? Is there like spectators? And I was like, yeah, obviously. Of course, we need a scoreboard up somewhere in the expo center that shows the leaderboard and stuff. How did I not think to put that in the requirements? Literally, the very first thing I'm missing is an entire persona that's really important to this experience. And you're just, my point in all of this is you can prompt engineer all day long, but we suck at it. We're not going to get it right. Right? This idea of kind of mob collaboration, bringing the whole team together to talk through the requirements is how you flesh out all these things you're not thinking of. And that's really important. It doesn't change with AI. So what we're promoting is sort of don't just myopically focus on trying to prompt engineer or context engineer, whatever we're going to call it these days, and get everything right the first time. Bring AI in earlier. Let it ask all its questions in those early phases. Make it part of the team that's planning. And the prompt engineering stuff will kind of fall into place because it'll ask you the questions that it doesn't understand. And you'll work out and you'll refine that prompt over time rather than spending all your time trying to get it right. Right. That's the shift that we have, I think, as a company or at least as my community and my team.
Yeah.
Found in the last few months that's resonating and working and changing the outcomes and really pushing what we're able to do, and also exactly what we've built Kiro to do. Right. We're seeing a lot of success with this, doing these kind of forcing Q to play this role, but we want to build it and make it a first class experience in Kiro and make Kiro really good at doing that for you.
That's amazing. I mean, I really like the point where you just told me that, before you actually do the prompt engineering, before the team gathers and, finalizes it, there has to be an interaction with AI and then the things are going to get refined. So I just love the point and it actually, struck a chord with me, seriously.
Great. Good. I'm glad. I mean, it really, that's not an uncommon outcome too. When we start talking to customers about this, the light bulb comes on really fast. It doesn't, the fact that, and we're not the only, AWS is not the only company talking about this. I do hear others out there kind of thinking along these lines. Yeah. But it doesn't seem to come naturally. We have evolved all of these patterns slowly over time. We know what good software development processes look like. We've worked this out for humans.
Yep.
But something about bringing AI into that equation tripped us up somewhere along the way. And we lost the rigor, we lost the discipline that we've had. We've been just for the last couple of years running this very, vibe, iterative process that, maybe made sense to software developers 20 or 30 years ago. That's how they worked. But we've gotten much more disciplined over time and we lost it now. We're trying to bring it back with these tools.
That eventually will come back to the fore for sure, Brian. Now, Brian, I just wanted to ask this from your end. Like, what is your view on the future of cloud technology?
Sure. Yeah, so I think a couple fold here. I'll start with you. You phrased that question as cloud. If you had asked me this a few years ago, I'd probably have a much more informed opinion. My focus is very narrow now on just kind of the developer community. But I think on the cloud side, what still blows me away these are normal, right? We used to talk about how cloud was the new normal in AWS, but it truly is, right? This is kind of if you're going to launch something new, you go cloud first for the most part. Despite that, though, Gartner's still saying 80-85% of workloads are on-prem. There's still a huge amount of IT spend that's happening in local data centers. We know these patterns to be inefficient. I think we're still really in the beginning, early phases of what
Yeah,
cloud is, and there's still a ton of growth. Um,
indeed.
that said, I am not really fully plugged into the full breadth of things like I should be anymore, and kind of very focused on this developer and Gen AI space. And I think what I'm seeing happen there, and I'm maybe not the most prescient person, but what I imagine is happening as you watch this shift. We started from Code Whisperer writing a few lines of code for you, predicting the next couple of lines, to Q writing entire implementations for you, into Kiro that really says, no, I'm going to broaden that into much more of the software developer lifecycle. I'm going to start with requirements all the way through to software. Um, and in parallel with this, I mentioned we're also building into some of the DevSecOps tools. So we did a collaboration with GitLab. We're doing this in GitHub. I'm sure there'll be others in the near future, but you're sort of seeing this shift from very small amounts of code being written to broader and broader and broader. And then with GitHub and GitLab implementations, rethinking that and saying, hey, do we even need a developer to check this out for some of this small work? What portion of this work can we just let the tools do on their own?
Yeah,
And so what we're doing in GitHub and GitLab is taking an item out of the backlog. Users are reporting issues, or there's feature requests. Not all of those need to go to a developer. And a developer would consider a lot of that a distraction, saying, "Oh God, I don't want to spend the next hour fixing this silly little bug." We can just let generative AI do that,
yeah,
and then go review the PR that it creates. So it just does all the work
absolutely.
itself, takes the item out of the backlog, you assign it to the tool works on it, um, pushes in a PR at the end, and you just go and review it. I think that this is the very beginning of kind of the next step where we really see this shift away from the IDE. I'm not such a believer in AI that I think the developer role is going away in the next couple of years. I think developers are around for the long time, but
Yeah,
we'll be working on the meatier, more important stuff, and a lot of this noise, this crap, will just go to AI. I think that the next phase of this, though, is really leaning into those experiences. Right now, we've got kind of very simple experiences in different tools. There are other startups out there that are starting to look at more holistically, like how do we automate the entirety of the software developer process outside of the tools. So, could we integrate with all of your existing tools? And hey, GitHub or GitLab are great, but no company uses those exclusively. I have a combination of all of these 30 tools that I touch from inception, from planning all the way through to production deployment. I want an AI that's aware of all of those and uses all of those and can use all of these best of breed tools together. I think that's kind of the flow, is to summarize it, just broader and broader and broader scope. We
right.
trust them more and more and more, and we give them broader and broader scope as a result.
Absolutely. Now, you just were saying that, there is an integration of, AWS with GitHub. Now, I want to
Mhm.
ask this personally from your end, and I don't know, this question, just crossed my mind. And I wanted to ask that, is there going to be any kind of a collaboration between the cloud and robotics? Is there going to be any, let's say
Oh,
collaboration on, or let's say a complementing factor between them?
yeah. So we do have we have an IoT team, and they also have there's a robotics section that's part of that. I'm blanking on the name of it. We sort of are the primary keepers of is it just Robot OS? It seems too simple. I'm not close enough to that space to really know. And I have dabbled a little bit. Rewind back to the university days when I was helping universities. A lot of them do quite a bit of IoT work. A lot of that is, say, my daughter just started in environmental engineering. I worked with the environmental engineering teams to put sensors out in the field, to put these large scale sensor fleets out to monitor things in the environment. And I've done those with AWS IoT and things like that. I haven't connected the dots myself. I'm sure other smart people within Amazon and many other big companies are thinking about how to bring that stuff together and both expand the ability of some of these remote devices to be autonomous and actually do work, as well as just making sense of the data that's coming back and analyzing it using advanced AI. But I'm not close enough to speak intelligently about that. I wish I was. That's way cooler than what we do.
All right. The relatable answer would do, Brian. That completely, sums up the point. And now, Brian, you just in the starting itself only, you just gave a complete, let's say, a teaser kind of a thing for our listeners, and that is like basically, which I am actually interested to ask you this, like, years or let's say a decade back, you just came up with a book called Pro PowerShell for Amazon Web Services with Apris. So, like, can you just give me a more insight on that? Like, we just were having a very basic idea on it. Now, let's go deep into it.
Yeah, sure. So I think two pieces. Let's talk about the book, and then let's also talk about the process of writing a book, because it's really interesting too. So again, go back, right? This is pre-AWS. I was at KPMG at the time, and we were doing a ton of automation of our private cloud using Cisco tools. They were, I forget what Cisco called them. They were called Tidal and NewScale originally, and then during the time we were working with them, Cisco acquired them and renamed them, and I can't think of the new name that they had. But they were Windows workflow based, and so a lot of .NET code in there, a lot of PowerShell automation, and we were building private cloud. But I was also building out our automation for public cloud. So we were mostly private cloud focused at the time, but we also managed AWS resources, and we're looking at other clouds too. There were really no other competitors at the time. So I spent a lot of time automating using our internal tools to be able to provision resources in AWS. And to be blunt, I work for Amazon now. I didn't at the time, but I'll still be blunt. The documentation was just horrendous back then. It's gotten a lot better, but the PowerShell documentation was terrible. I'm good friends with that team. I knew them before I even started because I was working on the book. I got to know Norm Johansson and Steve Roberts were like the drivers back then. Many of them still at AWS of that team, but the documentation just didn't exist. And so we did a really good job of documenting the AWS CLI that you would use in, on a Mac or in Linux. You could run it on Windows, but we were more comfortable in PowerShell. And so that was really well documented. It was written in Python based on the Bodo framework. And I spent a lot of my time taking, okay, let me go and read through the docs on this and then figure out what they actually did in PowerShell. And and what some of these methods are expecting. What are the constructs, and what are these PowerShells passing around objects? So often you got to like build up a little bit of an object before you pass it in, and none of that was well documented. So we did this for a year, and we had kind of our own wiki internally at KPMG of all this great stuff. And I was like, we should just turn this into a book. So I got permission from KPMG to write a book about it, and spun it off into a book on PowerShell. I published the first version I wrote on my own in about 6 months in free time, commuting to work and things like that, and published that in like 2011, 2012. I can't remember exactly now, a while ago. It was reasonably successful. So I'll move into writing. The writing process, this is not a rewarding process financially. It's fun to do it. It's a great resume builder. I enjoy doing it. I wouldn't rush to do it again because it's a ton of work for the return. Apparently this book was reasonably successful because Apris was hounding me for years to write a second edition. We did eventually, but I brought in some other authors to help fill in the gaps. I contributed. I rewrote my chapters, and then other authors added a bunch of new stuff to it. And so it was successful enough for that. But in all honesty, I think the biggest like royalty check I've ever gotten in a year was maybe like $200. And I still get checks for $10 or $20 every year, but not enough to make it meaningful. Fun process. Everyone should do it once. No one should do it twice is sort of my advice on this. There's not enough there. Also, I will say Amazon's done a great job of getting the documentation up to date. So the AWS documentation for PowerShell is great now. There's absolutely no reason to buy this book at this point. As much as I'd love you to, and maybe give me a $30 check this year, it's way out of date, and there's really good documentation out directly from the source. So it's not needed anymore.
All right, Brian. Now, Brian, when did you get this idea that you wanted to write a book? Like, did you get this idea on one of your travels to any, let's say to any exotic destination, or let's say to any, hill station kind of thing? Like, did that idea occur to you then?
Not necessarily. I think I've always wanted to write a book. I'm kind of an academic at heart. I went back to school and did an MBA. I've always wanted to write a book, and I did it. I've always wanted a patent. I haven't gotten to that one yet, but one of these days I will buckle down and get my name on a patent. And I just sort of, I'm a nerd. I'm a nerd. I love this stuff. That's what I like to do. In this case, though, there was a need, right? There was just an industry need for this. There were a lot of people trying to do what I was doing, and the stuff wasn't well documented. I was putting a lot of stuff up on blogs, but I felt at the time like getting this into a book would really help the rest of the community that was trying to do .NET and PowerShell dev with AWS. And apparently it was, right? Because this was, it was presumably a successful enough endeavor that they really wanted to do it again. So I
Awesome.
think it was worth it. No exotic destination. I worked on the book in a lot of crazy places. I worked on that book at, vacationing with the family. I worked on that book in mornings in the hotel at reInvent. I've, everywhere that I was for those 6 months, I was working on that book, trying to find
Right.
time to do it in my Slack time. I had young kids at the time. So it's hard to find. It's hard to find the time to do something like that.
Okay, that was a very tedious journey, I would say, of
Yeah,
writing the book and finally, publishing it.
absolutely.
All right. So then, Brian, I mean, I find this very coincidental. Even I'm a person who has, done MBA and I'm, doing my double masters right now. So I just came to know about this, Brian, that, you have a computers engineering degree, background. But I wanted to understand, like, what pursued you, or let's say, what was your drive to opt for an MBA altogether?
Yeah, yeah. So I think, like many nerds, I'm always trying to balance that career progression versus nerdiness. And I went for a computer engineering degree. I kind of shifted into computer science. I think for many years, I think I was a pretty good developer. I'm not anymore. I'm not actively writing code right now. I'm mostly leading a community. And if you look at my career progression, I sort of multiple times have made that move back and forth between managing a team and building out an organization and then shifting back. I talked about one of these at the beginning of my time at AWS, right? I was leading first the New York office and then took over the entire Southeast. Like my career progression on paper looked really good
Right.
and aligned very much with that constant pressure to figure out if you want to make that jump and leave the technical world, leave the IC contributor world, give up your technical chops to go and do something um, in more of a leadership role. And the MBA aligns with that struggle in my life. Not to say that it isn't valuable. I'll come back to that in a minute. Um, but in that story that I told earlier about the early days of AWS, like there was a point in there where my wife would say, "Hey, the pendulum has swung too far. You're running a big organization now, right? You've got a fairly large scope of responsibility driving and hiring this team, but you're not happy, right? You belong on the other side, and you'll find a lot more joy and happiness if you just go the other way." So that that is not the only time that's happened in my career. It's happened multiple times as I've bounced back and forth trying to find balance. That said, I think an MBA was an crazy valuable experience in my life. I learned so much from that directly aligns not just to being a leader, but also to IT and everything that we do. So
Right.
I went to Rutgers University for my MBA. That's the New Jersey State School, and there's a lot of finance in New Jersey because they're very close to New York City, and there's a lot of logistics because some of the big UPS, FedEx, some of the big logistics providers are based there, and so there's a lot of logistics. And I did a lot of manufacturing, forecasting, that kind of work. We had a really good program, so I specialized in that a lot, and the the similarities at the time, right? This is right as like Gene Kim was publishing the seminal works on DevOps and published the Unicorn Project and stuff. And if you look at like what happened with the Toyota production system that became lean manufacturing and Six Sigma, I think of like the parallels between lean and DevOps are really, really strong. In fact, the Unicorn
Really?
Project is all about that
Okay.
parallel, right? If you read the Unicorn Project, it's all about these IT guys looking to what was happening in manufacturing and borrowing those practices to bring into a DevOps world.
Okay.
And man, it was like the light bulb was just every day the light bulb would go off and say, yeah, like I like all these new cutting edge things that we're doing in IT, business figured this out 30, 50 years ago. And we're just we are a very immature industry. Vibe coding is a great example, right? We are an immature industry. If you look at Six Sigma, right, there's so many parallels to IT right now, and there's so much to be learned. So this is the time where I was kind of just starting on the private cloud project at KPMG, and I built this whole in the Lean Six Sigma class that I took, built out this whole value chain analysis of what it took to build a VM at the time at KPMG. And it's going to sound crazy when I say it, but we were running on average 6 to 8 weeks to deploy a VM, assuming that we had the hardware to host it. God forbid you had to order a new host or get a couple more drives to put into one of the storage arrays. And this would easily slip into 6 months, but it took forever. And when we dug into it, right, I mapped this whole thing out. When we dug into it, it really only took about 4 hours to build a VM. Still sounds crazy long by today's standards, but it didn't take that long. There's a lot of human work going on in there. It all happened in these handoffs. It all happened from the time that, I boot this thing up on a Pixie network and get an OS installed. That's the OS team is running that portion of it. Then they put a ticket into the networking team to move the machine to another network so that we can patch it, because now it needs internet access, but in a controlled environment so we can get its patching. And that would take a week just to move it to a new network because, hey, the networking team is busy doing other things. All these handoffs are what kill us in our traditional processes in IT. And it's exactly the same thing that like Toyota was discovering in the early days of Lean and saying, no, we can't have a team that's responsible for, spinning up tooling and just stamping out 1 million left front doors today and building up this huge warehouse of doors. And then they switch gears and start making hoods. Like, this process is broken, it doesn't work. Lean was all about crushing that down and reducing those tooling changes and stuff. It's exactly the same thing that we were doing in IT. And so those learnings are really profound. Everybody should study this stuff, regardless
Absolutely.
of, I assume this also works in every other career too. Everybody should do this. It's really, really valuable. But coming back to your original question, right? You're seeing in my career progression that constant pull between, hey, I'm succeeding and we're growing the team and we're doing really well. Do I want to continue on this path? The team has grown to the point where I can't be hands-on anymore. Do I want to be a leader of this team and hand off my technical chops, or do I want to stay embedded in it? And right now, my role is in that sweet spot. For the last 3 years, I've run a huge team virtually. Nobody reports to me. I don't have the hire and fire responsibility. I'm hands-on enough because my primary role is keeping them up to date with all the things that are going on and helping them to be experts in our tools. So I have to be the preeminent expert across our portfolio of developer tools, but I still have that scope of influence across this massive organization that is my community. It's awesome.
That's brilliant, Brian. Brian, you were just, drawing the parallels between the management side, like with respect to the lean manufacturing and to that of DevOps. That actually, gave me a thought that, whatever movies that we see, let's say, I came to know this, like few Hollywood movies, they got inspired from Japanese films. So I feel that, this inspiration from different worlds is no different, and
Yeah.
it's of no exception in different forms. So
Yeah. I mean, I haven't read that specifically, but I will say the world has gotten so much smaller in the last few years. I travel a lot. This community that I run is global. I've been to Korea and Japan and Vietnam and India and Singapore and lots of places this year. I've been all over the place. When I remember my first role, right, I said I spent time living in England. I lived in England for about a year right out of college with my first job. It was about 9 months. And England felt very different than the US back then, right?
right.
When you walked around, most of the cars that were on the road I had never seen before. They were brands I'd never heard of. There was
Okay.
almost no overlap except for a few odd, that we had BMW, they
Okay.
had BMW. There were a couple odd cars that you would see. People dressed different. Like, I looked weird when I first got there because our style was so different than what was
Is it?
happening in England. And this is only 20, 25 years ago, right? This is like 1999, 98, 99, when I was living there. You go all over the place. I mean, I was just in Korea, and you walk the streets of Korea, and it looks exactly like the U.S. People dress like we do. The cars are identical to ours. My kids watch Japanese cartoons constantly. The world has really shrunk so much in the time that, in my adult life. It's crazy to watch that progression. So super
Absolutely.
interesting.
It is very interesting, and it's going to be much more interesting, I believe, as we go, as we, climb up the ladder in the future.
Yeah. Yep.
That's amazing, Brian. Now, Brian, for our listeners, would you like to, shed some spotlight on the Amazon reInvent community building, and
Yeah.
also, along with that, running an internal community?
Sure. Yeah. So I've talked a little bit about my current role, right? I run this community of people that identify as developers within Amazon. If we step back a little bit, for the first year, if you come in one of these roles as a solutions architect or a technical account manager, you're going to spend your first year learning the breadth of AWS services. There's so much to know here, but by year two, you're supposed to specialize, and you could choose to be a storage specialist or a networking specialist or a security specialist. In my case, I run the community that identify as developer specialists. And as I said, a good part of what we do is helping customers having deeper knowledge in that area. But that's only one of three things. I think we do a lot of that. Then we do a lot of patterns and practices and contributions to OSS projects that we've touched on a little bit. We also do a lot of the thought leadership, and that comes as both written video or three ways, I guess: written, video, and through big events. So I work very closely now with the marketing teams that own these processes. They own the blog channels, they own the AWS summits and reInvent. But I have this huge team of experts, and so I spend a lot of my time finding and sourcing the speakers, getting them up to speed, doing the enablement necessary so that they can go talk about stuff. The biggest of those is reInvent. So reInvent is usually happens at the very end of November or very beginning of December. The week after Thanksgiving in the United States is typically when we run it. And we'll have 60,000 people in Las Vegas. We take over almost the entire strip. It's nearly, I don't know exactly, but probably 1.5 miles, 2 miles from one end of this event to the other. It's crazy big. It's wild being there, and there's just AWS people everywhere. Everyone's got AWS gear on and shirts. It's super cool to be a part of it. But I run the developer track for that. So I source all the speakers, plan all the what are we going to talk about, what events are we going to cover, and plan out the entirety of that. So there's a ton of work that goes into that every year. We're right in the heart of it right now, doing the planning. I know it's only August. December seems really far away, but we're already right at the very peak of putting all of that together. The session catalog is starting to get published, so there's a ton of work going on about that now. So, of course, too, reInvent is also where we do all of our big announcements. We announce things throughout the year, but a lot of the big splash happens at reInvent. And so there's a ton planned for our portfolio of developer tools. And as I shift now, I got maybe another month of planning the event and getting all the sessions lined up and stuff. Then we will shift very much into enablement mode again, where what I'm trying to do is bring the community up to speed on all the stuff that's about to launch. And that's the combination of getting the speakers ready so that they can go out and talk about it, but also prepping to get the whole community ready, because the day after they announce it, we're going to start getting all these customer requests to learn more about these tools. And so I've got to get the entire community ready to go and talk about it. So it's a crazy couple of months going into reInvent. There's nothing like it. It's like the busiest period of the year. And then we get, January's quiet. January quiets up a little bit, and you get a little time to think. And by mid-February, we're starting to plan the next one and think about next year's reInvent. So it's
Nice.
kind of always happening.
Brilliant. Brian, that gives me a feeling that even I also want to, be part of this, Amazon reinvent community building. Probably, once I complete my master's, then definitely I'll take a ticket all the way to Las Vegas and be part of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, you should come if you haven't done it. I mean, of course, we do run the AWS summits. There's a Sydney and Melbourne summit that you can go see. They're free. They're big and exciting, but nothing like reInvent. There's nothing quite like reInvent. I've never
Yeah.
been to an event like it.
All right. So, I mean, having said that, you just, gave the examples of Sydney and Melbourne, the Amazon AWS summit that I have been to, to a couple of times in Melbourne, and, met, many renowned people in that space, like Mr. Aaron Senf and all of them. So I
Sure.
was just trying to understand this from your end. Did that ever occur to you that you want to come up with a, Amazon reinvent community building world tour, taking it across,
Yeah.
not just, Las Vegas, but around the world,
Yeah. Yeah.
APAC region, Europe, India, wherever
Yeah.
it is.
We do a ton of global events. I think the summits are kind of what you're describing, right? We run the AWS summits all over the place. I'm directly involved in the North America ones. So there's New York, LA, Toronto,
All
and a
right.
few others that we directly touch. But then the rest of the world, we run this massive tour all around Europe, Asia, going down into Australia, everywhere we run these events. So there's always something, maybe not directly in your city, but close enough that you could get there and make it a day trip. It's a
Yep.
free event and you get immersed in the community a little bit and see what's going on. But there's a bunch of other stuff too. I've done, we did a tour across Europe 2 years ago that I was a part of, and we hit a bunch of the big cities in Europe and did a one-off event there. While I wasn't participating in, but while I was in India, I was in Bangalore 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
There was a serverless roadshow going on, and they were doing a bunch of stops. They had been all over Asia and all over Asia Pacific, visiting a ton of places. I think that's still going on. I went to the event while
Right.
I was in Bangalore on Friday, but I wasn't presenting. I wasn't really part of it. Some of
Okay.
my peers were, but that stuff is happening all the time. If you take a look, there's always something going on. And then nearly every big city has a user group. And there's an AWS user group going on where you can
Yep.
get involved and learn more about what's going on in the community.
Absolutely. It's an amazing event. I've been twice to the event, and there was like a podcast kind of thing going on. There was where I was invited by Mr. Aaron Senf, and then again I went for the first time. It was the Kubernetes event. I mean, like I think a tie-up between AWS and Kubernetes, but I just
Sure.
had a great time and interacting with a
Yeah.
lot of new people. And yeah,
Yep. Yeah, Aaron's a great guy too. I've known him for a few years working here. He's always at reInvent. He's always a speaker on our track.
yeah,
So good example. He's a really strong technologist and
he, he's a true
does
techie,
a
I
lot
must
of great
say.
work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah. I
absolutely.
don't know if he
When
still
he
does
was
that. Does he still do the Devs in a Shed podcast that he was doing for a little while? I don't know if they're still doing that.
probably, I
Paul,
think I
yeah,
missed it. When I
Aaron,
meet him next
Paul, and
time.
Matt are three great Amazonians that are based out of Australia. They used to run a podcast together. I don't know if they're still doing it, but they always build some great stuff.
They are. I mean, when Aaron was part of this show, he was like, I mean, he just, inspired me. Everything that he was talking about tech, he knew it was like an encyclopedia from A to Z. And I was like,
Yeah,
wow, he really
yeah,
knows a
yeah,
lot of things. I mean,
yeah, yeah. He's a smart guy.
absolutely, absolutely. So, Brian, before we actually, conclude our podcast initiative, let's take a lighter route. All this while, I was, bombarding you with a lot of tech questions, about your community building, then about, your aspect on cloud technology, and then, with respect to your development side tenure. Now we'll take a lighter route in the form of your likes and interests. Nothing technical.
Yeah, yeah, sure. So I'm in my late 40s now. I've got three kids. My likes are my kids' likes at this point. So
Okay. All right.
depending on the kid, we do a lot of different things. So my
Right.
daughter is very much the academic, very studious. I spend a lot of time with her, helping her out with school stuff.
Okay.
That's my oldest that just left for school. The middle one is kind of the movie buff. We spend a lot of time together doing things like horror movies. She's a big horror movie fan, so we spend a lot of time together doing that. My youngest is the gamer,
Yeah.
so he's I don't know. We're kind of in a transition period. Epic Games builds Fortnite. I don't know if you've played Fortnite, but Fortnite was the big one for a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah.
By the way, I said Raleigh is the home of like Red Hat and a few other big companies. We're also the home of Epic Games. So Epic Games
Oh,
that builds Fortnite is based in Raleigh here.
brilliant.
And
Yeah.
so, Fortnite was a huge thing. It was way bigger here because it's local, and
Okay.
part of our community and kind of part of the ethos. So I spent a ton of time playing games
Okay.
with my son. He's more of the PC gamer. I'm old school. I play on. We just moved from. We went from Xbox. We've been an Xbox family for years. We just made that transition about 6 months ago and got a PS5 and made the jump.
Oh
And
my God.
so,
Yeah.
so interestingly, now my middle daughter's the horror buff. We've kind of come together now on the PlayStation because that opens up all these new games that maybe they existed on the Xbox. It didn't have the following that they do on
Yeah. Yeah.
PlayStation.
Yeah.
Games like Resident Evil and The Last of Us. Um, so we've been really into those games and we've been playing a ton of that.
Okay.
So other than
Sure.
that, I don't have a lot of personal time between work and three kids and keeping up with all of them, but I am a nerd at heart. I love to learn.
Yep.
And so when I'm not learning nerdy computer science stuff or playing with the Raspberry Pi, I love just learning any other skill. A lot of that
Okay.
is kind of home improvement projects. I like to take on everything that I can around the house and
Perfect.
really dig in, learn how to do something that I didn't learn, that I've never done before. I never want to do it twice, but when there's an opportunity
Yep.
to build something new, or we finished the basement was a project for a while, or build a bar in the
Okay.
basement, that kind of stuff I will lean into and love. Um, any opportunity to go learn a new skill and learn how something new works.
That's amazing, Brian. So, like with likes of interest, you just gave me, a complete description about that. Now I'm going to ask you likes and interest in the form of a rapid fire round,
Oh, sure.
a
Yeah.
quick rapid fire round. So the first question to you, Brian. So, what's your favorite sports team of America?
Oh, man. So I'm from New York, and there's probably no more iconic team out of New York than the New York Yankees baseball team. But I also left New York quite a while ago, and I've now moved down into the Southeast United States where North Carolina is. And interestingly, pro sports are not as big a thing down here. There's a big university culture. Right? We've got three big universities right here in Raleigh, but the whole Southeast is full of these iconic big university teams. And so, sort of slowly maybe transitioning into college basketball and college football, American football, of course, for those outside of the US. But those are
Yeah,
now
NFL.
are more the big iconic things. And so I never followed college sports and I never really followed basketball or football. We were always more baseball focused. Um, Now it's sort of we're in that transition and I'm trying to find my way with all these new teams. I'm also a nerd, right? I mean, look at me. I didn't play a lot of sports. Um, I weigh in at about 140 pounds, 135, 140 pounds. So I didn't play a lot of sports in my life.
Right.
Um, so I'm trying to find my way in
Yeah.
this new environment.
Awesome. Awesome, Brian. So, Brian, you just, just were telling that you're a huge New York Yankees fan. So, if I would just like to ask you, like, who do you think is the best New York Yankee player, and
Oh,
who would that be?
and I don't think I could even identify a New York Yankee player currently. It's been 10 years since I lived up there and really followed it. So I'm out of my depth at this point. I really, as I think about it, I haven't watched a game in many, many, many years. Um, they haven't been as good as they once were either. Kind of early 2000s baseball was really exciting up in New York. The Yankees were always doing really well, and even there's two teams in New York, right? You got the Yankees and the Mets. They played each
In
other.
the mix, yeah.
Things got exciting there for a little while, but yeah, I'm out of my depth at this point. I don't know anymore, and
Okay,
and
so
nor could I really identify anybody in the college sports scene that is all new to me. I watch that because the neighbors watch that, and if you go out on a weekend and go to a bar in this area, it's going to be college sports on. But quite honestly, I
oh,
really don't know anything. I know nothing. So.
that's an interesting trivia for me about North Carolina then.
Yeah, and that's we have a football team in North Carolina, based out of another city, based out of Charlotte, which is a couple hours away. No baseball teams. Depending on where you are in the country, things can be very different. But up north, the north half of the country is very focused on pro sports first. The southern half of the country is very focused on college sports first. And
Okay.
there's pro teams around, but they're secondary to
Okay.
this area. So
All right. That's amazing. So, I mean, Brian, I mean, you must have this memory, right? I mean, you must have, grown up watching some cartoons. So what was that first cartoon show that you watched when you were a
oh
kid?
oh man. Wow. Yeah, I remember. So I'm pretty old. We used to watch kind of Saturday morning cartoons when I was really young, and it was like still a lot of Looney Tunes or Disney. Kind of the shorts were really
Okay.
popular.
Yeah.
I'm old enough that like the Smurfs were on, and if you've ever watched Gumby, Gumby wasn't technically a cartoon. That was more like claymation. Stop motion animation was big. Those are terrible though. Like those were the things that I watched as a kid, but looking back on them, man, they are so terrible. My kids would never watch that stuff now. Uh, it got a little better, right? Disney started to do things like Animaniacs and DuckTales and stuff like that, which moved into a little bit longer format, and I think is a little more progressive, more like today's stuff. As I got older, you started to see things out of MTV where they would do Beavis and Butthead or Ren and Stimpy, and those shows were starting to pop. But man, I'm really showing my age on this. Uh,
No worries.
and then, of
Everything
course,
is
when
vintage.
my kids were growing up, the stuff had gotten so much better. Even the early elementary stuff, the Dora the Explorers and Blue's Clues and all of that stuff was
Yeah.
so much better than the stuff that we watched. So much more valuable for education purposes. So,
You brought up the point of Blue's Clues because I was based in New Jersey and that was my show growing up.
yeah, yeah. That was a good show. I mean, not I was pretty old by that point, but I watched a ton of that stuff with my kids. They loved it. They ate that up. Dora the Explorer was huge in our house for years. My oldest, again, really, really kind of a nerd and an academic, and so any kind of educational stuff, she just ate that up. She loved it.
Brilliant, brilliant. That's amazing. So, Brian, I mean, you just have been to Bangalore. So, in Bangalore, did you have a chance of trying some Indian food, or let's say, and like, what is your favorite Indian food that you keep on trying all the time?
Oh, yeah. I love all food. I love spicy food. My oldest also
Okay.
is a big spicy food eater. One of the other things that I do with my kids a lot is well, at least me and the oldest, we go out to eat a lot. I'm having lunch. This is her first week of college, so I'm going to meet her for lunch today. We're pretty close to NC State, so it's an easy trip over there. Man, I am terrible at the names of the Indian food. I'm really I'm struggling as you ask this question. I mean, I of course know all of the, Western amalgamations, the butter chicken and the chicken tikka masalas and stuff like that. But I never can remember the names of the food. Luckily, most of the times when you go out, it's often buffet style, and you get to just try everything. And
Everything, yeah.
there's
Everything
nothing
was.
there's nothing I don't like. I love Indian food is among my
Oh,
favorites. Indian and Thai are kind of like my two go-tos. I love spicy food. I love really flavorful food. So those would be my first stops.
that actually makes my day, because I'm a huge fan of Indian food and, I like, I mean, I like spices and, I've just grown up,
Hmm.
eating that. So, if you have any, doubt with respect to the Indian food, like whichever, you can just describe it and I can, tell the name of it for you.
Oh yeah. So I really, while I was in India, kind of leaned more into the vegetarian stuff. We tend to do a lot of non-veg Indian in the US, right? Most of the meals have that in it. So I did a couple of the um, what's the one with the like blocks of, there's like a little block of soft cheese in it. Um, I'm blanking on the
That's
name
called,
of it, and I can't
that's
I
called
can't think of
palak
any of
paneer.
them. But
It's
yeah,
called
yes,
paneer.
that's exactly. Yep, that's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah, the paneer. That's awesome. I love it. There's also a lot of tofu and stuff that I love that I wouldn't know the name of. Um, yeah, I'm terrible at this game. Oh, and the breads. The Indian breads are the best, right? Now, I mean, there's the naan, but then there's what's like the big like puffed up one that like you
It's,
break up.
yeah, it's
That one's
called
awesome. It's so good.
rumali roti and tandoori roti.
Yeah, yeah, yep. Yep, that's awesome. I love that stuff. You get those, yeah, it's nice and crispy and good. Man, I love it. Oh, and I'm forgetting entirely about give me a second. I think I can get the name of this one. What's the big like crepe, South Indian
Dosa.
kind of crepe stuff?
It's
Dosa,
called
yeah,
dosa.
dosa is awesome. We have a great restaurant in Raleigh area that does
Okay,
dosa, and man, it is spectacular. And
really?
they do that. The other thing, one of the big things that I notice as I travel, mostly in Asia, is we have a really strict distinction between breakfast foods and the other foods.
Yeah,
Even lunch can be very different in the US, but often there's a lot of overlap between what you'd have for lunch and dinner. If you went to a restaurant, they'd serve the same thing at lunch and dinner.
yeah.
Um, Breakfast is a distinct thing, right? It's not, you would never eat anything at breakfast that you would have at dinner in the US and through most of Europe. When you're in
Yeah, yeah.
Asia, that breaks down entirely, right?
No, no,
It's
I mean
kind of
that
like,
stereotype is
yeah, the same
broken.
rice dish that you're going to have at dinner, they'll have at breakfast. And I love it that way.
Absolutely.
I love breakfast food. I love bacon and eggs. There's, that's kind of an iconic meal, and I love every bit of it. But I love spicy stuff. So when I go out in Asia and there's that big spread of breakfast and you get to try all these different things, like this is great. And they had dosa at the hotel every morning. That's what I was doing in at the hotel breakfast, and it was spectacular.
Amazing, amazing, Brian. That's good to know. Now, Brian, like, what is your favorite holiday destination, and what would you name that to be?
Oh yeah. Well, I think two answers on this one. So we relocated, almost 10 years ago to North Carolina. Most of my family is still up in the New York area. So for holidays, I like to go home. My
Okay,
wife is also, I'm from New York. My wife is from Chicago. So we'll go to
okay,
one of those two usually for the holidays. And I know something about the holiday season, that's kind of Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's in the US. Um, there's something about being with family, right? You got to get back and be with family for that.
right.
So aside from that, though, I'm inherently an explorer. We were in Puerto Rico, was our summer vacation this year, and we spent the time at the beach, which is great. It's beautiful, but I'd much rather be in some foreign city I've never been to, or hiking in the mountains is much more my style. It's not my
Exactly.
family. It's not my family style, though. They all want to go to the beach, so we usually go to the beach.
Okay.
So.
Interesting, interesting. That's good to know. Now, the final question to you, Brian. What is your favorite pop band, or let's say, a famous pop singer?
All right, so I'm going to just confess that like I stopped evolving the day I graduated high school. I graduated high school in 1994, and I pretty much haven't listened to anything new since then. So
Okay.
the popular bands of the time, right? That was kind of like the Seattle grunge scene, and so it was Nirvana, and it was moving into like Pearl Jam and
Yeah.
Soundgarden, STP. Those were like the big bands of that time, and are still kind of what I listen to.
Yeah.
Dave
Yeah.
Matthews was kind of a big deal in late college, and so I listened to a little bit of that. Um, Depending on what I'm doing, I do also. This doesn't align to any of that, but I am also a big Eminem fan. I do
Eminem.
love Eminem.
Eminem. Oh wow,
for
that's
for
a
for
very
later
different
music. Although
option.
he's now, I mean, Eminem hasn't been all that popular in many years, so I'm really dating myself. Um, recent music, I'm a little lost.
You know what? Even recent music, even I have no idea, but I love listening to the 80s and 90s music, the vintage music,
Yeah,
and I still have that
yeah,
in my
yeah,
playlist.
yeah. The kind of mid '90s is sort of really the iconic generation for me. I think there's a great meme, chart that you see kind of out on social media a lot that talks about like the age of people and the music that they consider to be the best. And it always pretty much peaks right around 19, 20 years old, kind of the very end of high school, very beginning of college. Like that's your music that you consider to be the best that
Yes,
follows you through life. And I embrace that entirely. So
absolutely.
um, yeah, it was a lot of kind of heavy metal in the middle school, early high school years, and then I kind of got into the little bit softer is not the right word, but more into that alternative grunge scene that was so big at the time.
Right. That's amazing to know, Brian. So, Brian, finally, thank you so much for taking time from your busy schedule and making this happen. We have just planned it out, and before getting together for this podcast collaboration, we just did a lot of planning, and finally, it has come true, and it's a mission accomplished for us. So it
Excellent.
was
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
it was lovely collaborating with you, and I just had a great time. You just took me in time. Your 20 years timeline, then about your tenure in AWS, your views about cloud technology, and then about the different expertise that you were talking about. They were just remarkable, and they just blew me off. So I had a great time, conversing
Excellent.
on this particular thing. So
Great. Thank you.
yeah,
Yeah, I wish it was only 20 years. You said 20 years. It's pushing 30. I'm a
doesn't
little
matter.
closer to 30 than 20 in my career. Hopefully,
Age is just a
yeah.
number.
Hopefully it slows down a little. Things are moving too fast.
All right. So, listeners, this is your host, Akhil Navluri, signing off. So, we would be back with another podcast episode with another eminent industry leader very soon. Till then, keep listening. Goodbye. Stay tuned. Thank you. Goodbye and au revoir. Thank you.